You've probably seen those royal family trees before. Kings, queens, a bunch of princes and princesses, all neatly lined up looking like they've been the same story for centuries. It's easy to assume it's all clean and simple, like history just handed us a finished picture. But what if that picture was edited? I started digging into European royal marriages, the usual suspects, Habsburgs, Romanovs, the House of Hanover, and all the rest. On the surface, it all makes sense. One ruler dies, someone else takes over, families marry into each other, alliances shift, and the bloodline keeps going. That's the story we're told, anyway. Then I started noticing the weird gaps, especially when you follow the women. Where did these princesses come from before they stepped into the big dynasties? We're told, oh, minor nobility, a distant cousin, or a princess from some tiny German state. Cool, but when I tried to trace those women back just 2 or 3 generations, the records get thin or just stop. Think about that. These families are obsessed with blood purity, with pure lines, with proving they deserve the throne. And yet, they're marrying women whose ancestry is basically a blur. The women show up with titles, but not much paper trail. By the time they're in the palace, their past is treated like it doesn't matter. Why would a family that cares so much about blood accept brides whose roots are so vague? Unless the vagueness was the point. Then I moved from documents to maps. Grab any old trade or military map from the 1600s or 1700s and look at the heart of Asia. Instead of the names we know today, you'll see something huge labeled Tartary or Grand Tartary, stretching from the Caspian Sea all the way into Siberia and beyond. This isn't a tiny patch of land, it's massive. And on these maps, there are cities, roads, trade routes, even royal courts. In other words, it doesn't look like a wild, empty steppe. It looks like a real, organized territory. Fast forward 100 years, and the label starts to change. Tartary becomes Russia, Qing China, Ottoman territory, or just empty space. The name vanishes, and the story changes too. Overnight, we're told it was just scattered tribes, not a real empire. Here's the problem. When real empires fall, we usually see a mess. Wars, treaties, refugees, rebellions, monks writing, "This is the end," that kind of stuff. But for Tartary, there's almost no record of collapse. No clear breakup, no big treaties, no dramatic fall. It just disappears from the map. And right around that time, new royal families start rising in Europe. Dynasties changing hands, borders shifting, new family trees suddenly looking legitimate. Coincidence? Or did something big get erased and then quietly replaced? That's when I started looking at palaces. Go to Vienna and stand in front of Schönbrunn. Then go to St. Petersburg and look at the Winter Palace. Then jump over to Beijing and look at the layout of the Forbidden City. Different styles, different cultures, different stories. But if you look closer, you'll notice something weird. The way the buildings are put together, the proportions, the spacing, the way they feel powerful even from a distance. There's a shared sense of scale and design. A lot of these things were built or massively rebuilt in the early to mid-1700s, the exact time when Tartary is fading from maps and new dynasties are taking over. Official history says, oh, it's just architects traveling around, copying styles, following the same trends. Maybe, but why do rival royal houses, supposedly competing with each other, keep using the same math, the same ratios, the same tricks to make buildings feel overwhelming? It's like they're all speaking the same hidden language of power. And then there's symbols. The double-headed eagle, specific crowns, lions, bears, certain color combinations, these show up again and again across different royal families that, on paper, weren't even really in touch. Symbolism doesn't usually pop up like that by accident. There's knowledge behind it, a shared vocabulary. There are also hints in old documents about languages that weren't supposed to be written down. Latin and French were the official court languages, but some notes talk about other tongues, ancient or traditional, that were used in private, never fully explained, never named. What if there was a secret language among these families, something older than the stories we get in textbooks, a way they could talk to each other without the public ever understanding what they meant? Then there's the fires. Royal palaces burn, national archives burn, libraries full of old records, maps, and genealogies burn. Madrid, Vienna, St. Petersburg, there are big, famous fires. And then there are a lot of smaller ones that wiped out specific batches of documents. Fires happen. Buildings are made of wood, lit by candles and oil lamps. But when you look at the timing, it feels suspicious. So many of these fires happen right before a new dynasty needs to prove its claim, right after a big territorial shift, or right when old records might challenge the new story. After each fire, the records that get rebuilt and rewritten tend to favor the new rulers. The correct bloodlines are confirmed. The questions that might have caused trouble are gone. It's like someone kept editing history, one burned page at a time. Now, fast forward to today. We have DNA. We can test ancestry. We can see how mixed or how connected people are. We've used genetics to blow up old myths about pure bloodlines. We've found that almost everyone carries traces of all kinds of places and people. So why hasn't there been a serious, large-scale genetic study of European royal families? Not just a tiny research project, I mean something thorough, something that tests multiple royal lines and compares them to ancient populations from Siberia, Central Asia, and the steppe. What would that show? Would we find hints of Central Asian or Siberian roots in families that claim to be purely Germanic or purely French? Or would it all line up with the official story? The fact that this kind of study hasn't been pushed by the royal institutions themselves is interesting. These families spend tons of money preserving their palaces, restoring their paintings, digitizing their archives. But when it comes to testing their actual blood, they're oddly quiet. Maybe there's nothing to hide. Maybe it would just confirm what we already think. But the silence is hard to ignore. All of this leads to a simple question. Is there a hidden Tartarian bloodline running through royal family trees, or are we just reading patterns into the gaps? Maybe there was a network of interconnected elites spread across what we now call Tartaria, Russia, and Europe that needed to be softened, renamed, and rebranded when the modern world took shape. Maybe the separate dynasties we were taught about are just branches of the same tree, repainted and rewritten. Or maybe it's all just coincidence. Maybe the maps were vague, the architecture was influenced by a few powerful styles, and the royal families really are what they say they are. I don't have a final answer, and I don't pretend that I do. But here's what I do have. Questions. Next time you see a European palace, ask yourself, who really built this? Not just the architects, but who really funded it? Who really benefited? Who really shaped it? When you hear about royal bloodlines, ask, where did this blood start? Whose history is missing from the story? And when you look at a modern map of Asia, ask, what was here before the borders we know today? And why aren't we really encouraged to ask that out loud? History is rarely a clean narrative. It's more like a collage of pieces, some preserved, some burned, some quietly rewritten. And somewhere in the gaps, there might be a different story. A story about who really built the world we inherited. A story we're not supposed to remember. But once you start seeing the patterns, you can't unsee them.